This was London, exactly 2,000 years ago.
If you love forgotten stories of powerful women, hit subscribe. I uncover a new one every week.
Every city keeps its secrets beneath the streets. In London, the deepest secret is a line of fire. It runs under the Walkie-Talkie Building, under the Gherkin, under Cannon Street and Gracechurch Street and the foundations of 1,000 offices where bankers eat their lunches. It is baked into the clay like a scar, a stripe of charred wood, burned daub, scorched pottery, and melted glass sitting roughly 4 to 6 meters below modern ground level. Archaeologists call it the Boudican destruction horizon. It is not a theory. It is not a legend. It is physical, datable, measurable evidence of a single catastrophic event, the total annihilation of one of Roman Britain's most important cities. It happened in approximately 60 or 61 CE. And it happened in a single day. To understand the destruction, we must first understand what was destroyed. Londinium in 60 CE was barely a decade old. Founded sometime around 43 or 47 CE following the Roman conquest of Britain under Emperor Claudius, it was not the capital of the province. That distinction belonged to Camulodunum, modern Colchester, the seat of Roman power and the site of a temple to the deified Claudius that British tribes had been forced to fund with their own money. But Londinium was already something more dangerous than a capital city. It was a marketplace, a crossing point, a hub. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing 50 years after the event, described Londinium as a place renowned for the number of its merchants and abundance of supplies. Archaeological evidence confirms this entirely. Excavations across the City of London, particularly those carried out during the massive building projects of the 1980s and 1990s, have uncovered an extraordinary density of pre-Boudican commercial activity. Imported Samian pottery from Gaul, Spanish olive oil amphorae, figs, lentils, and the remains of a sophisticated road network converging on a central timber bridge. This was a town of perhaps 15 to 30,000 people. And in the spring or summer of 60 CE, every single one of them needed to run. To understand why Londinium burned, we have to travel northeast, into the territory of the Iceni, a tribe of the British interior, and into one of the most consequential acts of Roman administrative brutality in the history of the province. The Iceni king, Prasutagus, had ruled as a client of Rome, a common arrangement. He kept his kingdom, paid his tributes, and maintained the fiction of sovereignty while Roman power grew around him. When he died, he left a careful will. Half his kingdom to the Emperor Nero. Half to his 2 daughters. His wife, Boudica, would govern. Rome ignored it. The Roman procurator Catus Decianus sent agents into Iceni territory who treated the kingdom not as a client state to be absorbed, but as conquered territory to be looted. Iceni nobles had their estates seized. Roman financiers, including, according to Tacitus, the philosopher Seneca himself, called in enormous loans that had been extended to British aristocrats. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, was publicly flogged. Her daughters were assaulted. Tacitus records this. Cassius Dio, writing later, confirms the broad strokes. Whether every detail is accurate is debated by scholars, but what is not debated is what happened next. The Iceni rose. Their neighbors, the Trinovantes, joined them, still furious over the temple at Camulodunum and the theft of their sacred land. Other tribes followed. And at the head of this coalition stood a woman described by Cassius Dio as tall, with tawny hair down to her hips, fierce eyes, and a harsh voice. The Roman governor of Britain, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was at the far end of the island, on the island of Mona, modern Anglesey, destroying the Druidic sanctuary there. He was days away. Possibly weeks. The door was open. Camulodunum fell first. The Roman colony had no walls and almost no garrison. Excavations at Colchester have uncovered the same evidence we find at London. A thick destruction layer of burning, collapsed buildings, charred grain, and shattered pottery. The Temple of Claudius, which had been the focal point of British resentment, was besieged and burned to its foundation podium. That podium still exists beneath Colchester Castle. The 9th Legion marched to relieve it. They were ambushed and destroyed. And now Boudica turned south, toward Londinium. Tacitus tells us what happened with chilling brevity. Suetonius arrived in Londinium, assessed the situation, and made a military decision. He did not have enough troops to hold the city. He could not defend it. And so, in an act that must have felt to the inhabitants like abandonment, he ordered a retreat. He would take with him only those who could march. The old, the sick, those who refused to leave, those who did not believe what was coming. They were left behind. What happened next? Archaeology has recorded in extraordinary detail. The Boudican destruction horizon is not uniform across London. It varies in depth, in composition, in intensity. But its character is unmistakable and deeply consistent in the areas of the Roman city that have been excavated. Archaeologists examining sites across the square mile have found evidence of a fire that burned at temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius, the kind of heat that does not come from accident. This was systematic destruction. At One Poultry, a site excavated ahead of the construction of a millennium-era office building, one of the richest Roman archaeological digs in British history, excavators found the destruction layer covering a dense spread of pre-Boudican buildings. Beneath the burn, evidence of sophisticated commercial structures, a possible mansio or inn, streets with wheel ruts worn into their surface. Above the burn, nothing. A gap in occupation. A silence in the earth lasting perhaps 10 to 20 years before the Romans rebuilt. At Bloomberg, London, the site of the extraordinary Roman Temple of Mithras, excavated in 2012 to 2014, the destruction evidence was equally vivid. Pre-Boudican timber buildings sealed beneath meters of burning debris. And among them, objects that speak not just of destruction but of the desperate, futile attempts to preserve what mattered most. Burned and melted objects appear across the horizon. Imported glass vessels that softened and collapsed in the heat, ceramic lamps fused to the floors they sat on, amphora stoppers still in place over jars that never got opened again. At several sites, hoards of coins have been found in or just below the destruction layer, the classic signature of a population burying valuables in the moments before catastrophe. They never came back for them. Tacitus tells us that Boudica's forces took no prisoners. This was not war in the Roman sense, the kind of war that ends in negotiated surrender and enslaved populations march to markets. This was annihilation. Cassius Dio describes executions that were ritualistic in their ferocity, acts that bore the character not just of revenge but of sacred violence. The Romans, who were not strangers to atrocity, were genuinely horrified. Archaeological evidence at Londinium has not yet directly confirmed mass death in the way that, say, Pompeii preserves its victims. The bodies of the Boudican dead have largely not been recovered. London's acidic clay does not preserve bone well, and centuries of subsequent building have churned the upper strata. But the absence of human remains does not mean an absence of human loss. It means the earth has simply forgotten what the fire did not. In 1988, during excavations at what is now the site of the Bloomberg office at Queen Victoria Street, something remarkable turned up in a well that predated the burning. Preserved in anaerobic conditions, the waterlogged soil that prevents decay, were writing tablets. Dozens of them. Thin wooden leaves coated in wax, with stylus marks pressed into their surface. These are among the oldest handwritten documents ever found in Britain. Most date to the period immediately before and after the Boudican revolt. They are business documents, receipts, contracts, legal declarations. One of the tablets is currently the earliest dated handwritten document from Britain. It is a financial transaction. It is dated to January 8, 57 CE. The tablets are not dramatic. They do not speak of war or queens or fire. They speak of timber transactions, of borrowing money, of the ordinary commercial life of a city that did not know what was coming. That is what makes them devastating. These are the voices of people who were simply living, trading, writing, counting, in a city that would cease to exist within a few years of these documents being made. The Bloomberg tablets are the sound of Londinium breathing before it burned. In 2013, during the Crossrail excavations, one of the largest archaeological projects in London's history, cutting a new east-west rail tunnel beneath the city, archaeologists discovered further evidence of the revolt's aftermath. At the Walbrook Stream Valley, which bisected Roman Londinium, skulls were found in unusual concentrations. 21 disarticulated skulls, predominantly adult males, dated broadly to the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. The interpretation is contested. Some scholars argue these are flood-deposited, naturally migrated from a nearby cemetery. Others point to the unusual concentration, the lack of associated postcranial bones, and the evidence of perimortem trauma on some specimens, and suggest something more deliberate, a site of execution, or the deposition of heads in a sacred stream, a practice documented in Iron Age Britain. The Walbrook itself was significant. Excavations along its buried course have consistently produced unusual quantities of human skulls, out of context, isolated, sometimes showing cut marks. Whether these are victims of the Boudican revolt specifically, or represent a broader Iron Age and Roman practice of head veneration at liminal water sources, remains genuinely debated. The archaeology does not always yield clean answers, but it does yield evidence that something violent and significant happened at this river. And it happened at exactly the moment the city burned. Boudica was defeated. The details of the final battle remain disputed, its location unknown, somewhere in the Midlands along Watling Street, probably in a forested defile where Suetonius chose to make his stand. Roman discipline against British numbers. The result was a Roman victory so complete that Tacitus records 80,000 Britons dead against 400 Romans. Those figures are almost certainly Roman propaganda. But the defeat was real. Boudica died, by her own hand, according to Tacitus, by illness according to Dio. The coalition collapsed. The revolt was over. And Rome rebuilt. What is extraordinary about the destruction of Londinium is what came after it. The gap in occupation visible in the archaeological record, that 10 to 20-year silence above the burning layer, was followed not by abandonment but by ambitious reconstruction. The new Londinium that rose from the ash was bigger, more permanent, and more Roman than anything that had come before. Stone replaced timber. A forum basilica complex, at its height one of the largest buildings north of the Alps, was constructed in the heart of the city. A governor's palace was built on the Thames waterfront. The city received walls. A fort was built at Cripplegate. Londinium became, finally and formally, what it had always been in economic reality, the true capital of Roman Britain. Archaeologists can read this transformation directly in the stratigraphy. Above the orange-red burning layer, there is a grey and sterile horizon. The gap, the silence, the years when London was empty. And then, above that, comes the explosion of post-Boudican construction. The layers become dense with activity again. The commerce returns. The voices return. But they are different voices now. The pre-Boudican settlement, that scrappy, organic, merchant-built town, is gone. What rises in its place is a formal Roman city, deliberate and permanent, planned by an empire that had been embarrassed and would not be embarrassed again. Beneath every office building in the city of London, the burning layer remains. It is still there, 4 to 6 meters down, depending on where you dig. In preparation for new construction, in cross-rail tunnels, in basement excavations, archaeologists continue to find it. A thin stripe of orange and red in the grey clay. Charred grain. Melted glass. Fused coins. The remains of a world that ended in a single day. The destruction horizon of Boudica's revolt is the oldest datable event visible in London soil. It is older than the medieval city, older than the Saxon town, older than the Viking raids and the Norman conquest and the Great Fire of 1666. It predates them all. And it sits there still, patient, permanent, and precise, waiting for the next trowel to find it. History is not always written. Sometimes it is burned.